They were just boys. No weapons. No criminal history. No evidence. But they were black. And that was enough. In 1989, 5 teenagers walked into Central Park and walked out branded as monsters. This is not a story about crime. This is a story about racism wearing a badge, a suit, and a smile. This is the story of the Central Park 5. New York City never really sleeps. It only pretends to. On April 19, 1989, the city breathed differently. Spring had arrived, but the air still carried winter's memory: cold concrete, damp grass, the smell of exhaust and ambition. Skyscrapers stood like silent judges, watching millions of lives move beneath them without mercy. For most people, it was just another Wednesday night. For 5 boys, it was the last night they would ever be children. A city that never looks down. Central Park sat in the middle of Manhattan like a fragile green promise. By day, it belonged to joggers, dog walkers, tourists, and dreamers. By night, it transformed, quiet, shadowed, unpredictable. Teenagers from Harlem and the Bronx often came here after school or dinner. Not for crime, not for trouble, for freedom. That night, a group of boys gathered near the north end of the park. They joked, pushed each other, laughed too loud. Their voices bounced off trees and pathways, careless and alive. They didn't know the city was already watching them differently. Not as kids, as threats. 5 names, 5 lives. Antron McCrae was 15. Tall for his age, quiet, thoughtful. His father was strict, military-minded, believing discipline could protect a black boy in America. Antron knew the rules. Don't talk back. Don't draw attention. Come home on time. That night, he just wanted to be normal. Kevin Richardson, 14, was the youngest. He smiled easily, trusted too quickly. He wanted approval from friends, from adults, from a world that rarely gave it to boys who looked like him. Yusef Salam, 15, was different. Calm, intelligent. He loved science, numbers, logic. His mother raised him to speak clearly, think carefully, and believe that truth mattered. He still believed that night. Raymond Santana, 14, lived between 2 worlds, Puerto Rican and black, never fully accepted by either. He carried himself tough because softness wasn't safe where he grew up. Corey Wise, 16, didn't even plan to be there. He followed his friend Yusef into the park at the last minute. Tall, quiet, loyal to a fault. That loyalty would cost him everything. Boys being boys, a crime in itself. They ran. They laughed. They chased each other down paths lit by flickering lamps. Some older teens nearby caused minor trouble, throwing rocks, yelling at cyclists. Nothing unusual for the city. But in New York, perception mattered more than reality. And perception said, a group of black boys equals danger. Police radios crackled that night with reports of disturbances. Not crimes, not attacks, disturbances. Still, officers moved in fast. When a story is decided before facts. Around the same time, deeper inside the park, a white female jogger went for her nightly run. She never came back. She was brutally attacked, beaten, raped, and left unconscious, barely alive. The crime was horrific, shocking, unimaginable. The city demanded answers. And fast. Police pressure mounted instantly. Media vans rolled in before the victim even regained consciousness. Fear spread like wildfire. New York didn't want justice. It wanted monsters. Wrong place. Wrong time. Wrong color. Police began rounding up teenagers near the park. No warrants. No probable cause. Just suspicion. The boys were grabbed, handcuffed, pushed into squad cars. Some cried. Some protested. Some froze. None of them understood what was happening. They asked questions. They were told to shut up. The police station, where children stopped matching. Inside the precinct, time dissolved. Bright fluorescent lights. Cold metal chairs. Closed doors. Parents were not immediately notified. Lawyers were not present. Food and sleep became bargaining chips. Interrogations began. One officer after another. Good cop. Bad cop. Threats. Promises. You can go home if you help us. You don't want to spend your life in prison, do you? They lied to the boys, telling them others had already confessed. They twisted timelines. They fed details. Hour after hour, fear replaced memory. A child's mind under pressure. Kevin Richardson was 14. 14. He had never been interrogated before. He had never been alone in a room with armed men telling him his life was over. When police told him he could go home if he talked, he believed them. When they told him what to say, he repeated it. By the end, Kevin didn't even know what was real anymore. Yusef Salam still believed in truth. Yusef tried to explain. Calmly. Clearly. He thought if he spoke honestly, adults would listen. They didn't. They twisted his words, corrected his answers, stopped the tape when it didn't fit their story. Truth was inconvenient. Corey Wise, the one without protection. Corey was 16, legally questioned as an adult. No parent in the room. No lawyer. No shield. He refused at first. So they broke him. Hours passed. Then more. Sleep deprivation blurred his thoughts. Eventually, exhaustion defeated innocence. He said what they wanted. Not because it was true. Because he wanted it to end. Confessions that made no sense, and no one cared. Each boy's statement contradicted the others. Different times. Different locations. Different actions. Some said the victim was attacked here. Others said there. Some described things that never happened. No DNA matched any of them. No physical evidence placed them at the crime scene. But the police had what they needed. A story. Media enters, and children are erased. Newspapers printed words like wolf pack, predators, savages. No names. No ages. No humanity. Just fear. Television anchors spoke with certainty before trials even began. America watched 5 black boys become villains overnight. A system relieved to blame someone. The police department praised itself for quick arrests. Politicians demanded punishment. The city exhaled. It didn't matter if it was right. It mattered that it was done. Mothers who knew the truth didn't matter. Their mothers screamed, cried, fought. They were ignored. Because in America, a black mother's certainty means less than a white city's fear. The door closes. By morning, the boys were no longer just suspects. They were symbols, scapegoats. The city had decided who they were. And once a system decides, truth becomes irrelevant. The real nightmare was just beginning. Inside the room where truth died. The Central Park 5 Voices Unheard. There is a room in every unjust system where truth quietly disappears. It doesn't scream. It doesn't fight back. It just fades. 4 or 5 boys in New York City. That room had white walls, bright lights, and a table bolted to the floor. That room was called interrogation. The illusion of authority. When the boys were first brought in, they were told, just answer a few questions. That lie is always the first one. Police uniforms carry power, especially over children. The badge, the gun, the tone of voice. To a teenager, authority feels absolute. Disobeying it feels dangerous. The boys didn't know their rights. They didn't know they could stay silent. They didn't know they could ask for lawyers. No one explained. And that was intentional. Time as a weapon. Interrogations stretched for hours. Then longer. Then into the night. Sleep deprivation is not an accident in police questioning. It is a tactic. A tired mind confuses imagination with memory. Fear with truth. 14-year-old Kevin Richardson sat in a chair too big for him. Eyes heavy, stomach empty. Officers came and went. Questions repeated. Voices raised. You were there. No, I wasn't. Yes, you were. Over and over. Until resistance felt pointless. How false confessions are built. Police didn't ask open questions. They fed answers. They corrected mistakes. When Kevin said something that didn't match their story, the tape stopped. When he repeated what they wanted, the tape rolled. This is how confessions are manufactured, not discovered. Your friends already told us everything. This lie was used on every boy. It isolates the suspect, creates panic, destroys trust. You're the only one not cooperating. What 14-year-old wants to be the last one holding out? Yusef Salam, when logic meets a wall. Yusef tried to reason. He asked questions. He pointed out inconsistencies. The officers grew impatient. They weren't there to investigate. They were there to confirm. Each time Yusef denied involvement, the tone hardened. His intelligence worked against him. Police assumed calm meant guilt. Corey Wise, the system's easiest target. Corey Wise was older, taller, blacker in the eyes of the system. He was questioned without a parent, without legal protection, without mercy. Hours passed. They yelled at him, threatened him, promised him freedom. Eventually, exhaustion won. Corey's confession didn't match anyone else's. It didn't need to. The story was already written. Confessions that defied reality. One boy said the attack happened near the reservoir. Another said near the path. Times didn't align. Actions contradicted each other. No prosecutor questioned this. Because consistency only matters when truth matters. The science police ignored. No DNA matched the boys. None. Blood, semen, hair, all pointed to one unknown male. Police dismissed it. Science was inconvenient. The media becomes judge and jury. Before charges were finalized, newspapers exploded. Faces blurred. Names hidden. Labels loud. Animals. Wolf pack. Predators. The public consumed it hungrily. Fear sells. Donald Trump enters the story. Donald Trump spent $85,000 on full-page newspaper ads. The message was clear. Bring back the death penalty. Not for adults. For children. No evidence mentioned. No trials referenced. Just rage. Public opinion hardens. By the time the boys entered court, America had already convicted them. Jurors are human. Humans absorb media. The trial hadn't started. But justice had already ended. Mothers screaming into silence. The mothers begged. They explained. They cried. They were ignored. Because the system doesn't listen to black mothers. It never has. A case built on air. No witnesses. No DNA. No timeline. Only confessions obtained under pressure. And that was enough. Why the system didn't care? Because the real goal wasn't truth. It was closure. A scared city wanted relief. And 5 black boys were convenient. The final lie. Police told themselves. If they confessed, they must be guilty. But the truth was darker. They confessed because the system broke them. The trap closes. By the time charges were filed, it was too late. The boys were no longer individuals. They were symbols of fear. And symbols don't get justice. They get sacrificed. The courtroom where innocence was illegal. There is a strange silence inside a courtroom. Not the peaceful kind. The dangerous kind. The kind where truth is present. But not welcome. For 5 black boys, the courtroom wasn't a place of justice. It was a theater. And the verdict had already been written. Entering the room as criminals, they were brought in wearing suits that didn't fit. Too big at the shoulders. Too long at the sleeves. Borrowed clothes. Borrowed dignity. The courtroom didn't see children. It saw headlines. Jurors had read the papers. They had seen the fear. They had absorbed the narrative. 5 boys. 1 crime. Case closed. The prosecution's opening. A story, not evidence. The prosecutor didn't begin with facts. She began with emotion. She spoke of savage violence, loss of innocence, a city under attack. She used words carefully chosen to inflame. Not once did she explain how 5 confessions contradicted each other, why no DNA matched, why timelines didn't align. Because fear doesn't need logic. Confessions as holy scripture. In court, the confessions were treated like gospel. Never mind how they were obtained. Never mind the ages. Never mind the hours of interrogation. The jury was told. They admitted it themselves. Confession, in American courts, is king, even when it's false. Defense lawyers fighting the wind. Each boy had a different lawyer, different strategies, different resources. This fragmented defense helped the prosecution. No unified voice. No shared narrative. Just 5 separate boys, fighting a system designed to crush individuals. When DNA was mentioned, quickly, the defense tried. They explained DNA. They explained that none of it matched the boys. The prosecution waved it away. The absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. A clever sentence. A dangerous one. The racial subtext no one said out loud. No one in the courtroom said the word racism. They didn't need to. Every glance, every pause, every assumption carried it. 5 black boys from Harlem. A white female victim. America knew this story, even when it wasn't true. Corey Wise stands alone. Corey was tried separately. Older, bigger, more threatening. He didn't cry. He stared. The jury interpreted silence as guilt. They always do. Jury psychology, fear over facts. Jurors are human. Humans fear chaos. This crime represented chaos. Convicting the boys represented control. They didn't want to believe police could be wrong. They didn't want to believe the system could fail. So they didn't. The verdict, one word that destroyed lives. Guilty, the word echoed. Mothers collapsed. Fathers stared into nothing. The boys didn't fully understand yet. They thought appeals would fix it. They were wrong. Sentencing, when children were thrown away. Years were announced. 5 years. 7 years. 10 years. Spoken calmly, casually, as if talking about parking tickets. The boys were handcuffed, led away. The courtroom moved on. Prison is not designed for children. Rikers Island. Adult prison. For teenagers. No protection. No mercy. Corey Wise was sent alone. Into hell. Corey's first night. He didn't sleep. He listened. Screams. Threats. Metal doors. He realized quickly. The system hadn't just failed him. It had delivered him. Survival becomes the only goal. In prison, innocence is irrelevant. Only strength matters. Corey learned to fight. Not because he wanted to. Because he had to. The others, juvenile hell. The younger boys were sent to juvenile facilities, which were only slightly less violent. Isolation. Humiliation. Constant surveillance. They aged years and months. Letters that went unanswered. They wrote letters. To judges. To officials. To anyone. Most were ignored. Because the system doesn't revisit closed cases. Especially when the wrong people are locked up. The world forgets quickly. The headlines faded. New crimes replaced old ones. The boys grew up behind bars. America moved on. Why this part matters? Because injustice doesn't end at conviction. That's when it begins. The courtroom gave legitimacy to a lie. And once a lie is legalized, undoing it becomes nearly impossible. Legalized injustice. 5 boys entered the system as suspects. They exited the courtroom as criminals. Not because they were guilty, but because the system needed them to be. Prison was the punishment. Innocence was the crime. Prison does not ask whether you are guilty. It only asks one question. Can you survive? For the 5 boys wrongly convicted in the Central Park case, prison was not a place of rehabilitation. It was not correction. It was not justice. It was erasure. Entering a world with no exit. The first thing prison takes from you is time. Not just the years on your sentence, but your sense of time itself. Days blur. Nights stretch. Hope becomes dangerous. For Corey Wise, prison gates closed behind him with a sound he would never forget. A metallic finality. A reminder that the world he knew no longer existed. He was 16 years old. And completely alone. Adult prison for a child. Corey was sent to Rikers Island, an adult facility notorious for violence. No special protection. No juvenile wing. No second thought. To the system, he wasn't a child. He was a number. In prison, weakness is visible. Fear has a smell. And innocence is a liability. Corey learned quickly that silence could provoke violence, and speaking could invite worse. There was no safe choice. Violence as a language. Prison communicates through force. The rules are unwritten, but absolute. Look too long, problem. Don't look at all, problem. Stand your ground, problem. Back down, problem. Corey was attacked within days. Beaten, threatened, tested. Every fight was a lesson the system never taught him, but expected him to learn. Solitary confinement, legal torture. When Corey defended himself, punishment followed. Solitary confinement. A small concrete box. No window. No human contact. 23 hours a day. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into months. Solitary doesn't just isolate the body, it fractures the mind. Corey talked to the walls. Counted footsteps that weren't there. Fought panic attacks with memory. This was not discipline. It was psychological destruction. The others, growing up behind locked doors. The younger boys, Kevin Richardson, Raymond Santana, Antron McCrae, and Yusef Salam, were placed in juvenile facilities. Juvenile did not mean safe. It meant controlled violence. They were labeled as rapists. That label followed them everywhere. Guards knew. Other inmates knew. Everyone knew. Protection was minimal. Threats were constant. Shame as a second sentence. The boys carried more than prison numbers. They carried stigma. Mail slowed. Friends disappeared. Neighbors turned away. Their families suffered silently. Mothers worked extra shifts. Fathers aged fast. Homes fell apart. Injustice doesn't imprison just one person. It punishes entire families. Mental survival becomes everything. To survive, the boys adapted. They hardened. They buried emotions. Because crying marked you as weak. Because hope invited disappointment. They stopped dreaming about freedom. Dreams hurt too much. Corey's breaking point. Years passed. Corey was transferred from facility to facility. Each transfer erased any fragile stability he built. In one prison, he was brutally assaulted. Instead of protecting him, guards punished him again. Solitary. Again. This time, Something inside him broke. He attempted suicide. The system responded with paperwork. When innocence doesn't matter. Corey repeatedly told officials he was innocent. They didn't care. In prison, guilt is assumed. Appeals are inconveniences. The courts had spoken. That was enough. The cruel irony of good behavior. Some of the boys were released early for good behavior. Imagine that. Being rewarded for behaving well in a place you never belonged. Freedom came slowly. And it wasn't clean. Life after release is not freedom. When they were released, the world felt unfamiliar. Technology had changed. Friends had moved on. Opportunities were gone. They carried criminal records. They couldn't get jobs. Couldn't get housing. Couldn't escape their past. Freedom without justice is incomplete. Corey remains behind. While the others slowly returned to society, Corey stayed inside. Because his sentence was longer. Because he had no juvenile protections. Because the system decided he was expendable. He watched the years pass. From a cell. The question that never left them. Every night, one question haunted them all. How did this happen? They had no answer. Because the truth was unbearable. It happened because they were black. Because they were poor. Because the system needed someone to blame. Because prison is where injustice reveals its true cost. Courtrooms hide behind language. Prisons reveal consequences. This wasn't a mistake. It was a machine doing exactly what it was built to do. Surviving the system. They entered prison as boys. They survived as something else entirely. And one of them was still waiting for the truth to catch up. When the truth finally spoke. Truth has a strange habit. It waits. It doesn't rush. It doesn't beg. It doesn't argue. It simply waits for the lie to grow tired. For more than a decade, the truth waited quietly while 5 innocent men lost their youth behind bars. And then, without warning, the truth stood up. A man with nothing left to lose. In 2001, a man named Matias Reyes was already serving life in prison. Multiple murders. Multiple assaults. No chance of release. The system had nothing left to offer him. And that is why he finally spoke. The confession no one expected. Reyes approached authorities with a statement that stopped everything. He said, "I raped the woman in Central Park. Alone. No accomplices. No gang. No 5 boys. Just him." He knew details only the real attacker could know. Details never released to the public. Details that matched the evidence perfectly. DNA doesn't lie. This time, the system couldn't look away. DNA from the crime scene was tested again. It matched Matias Reyes. Perfectly. One man. One attacker. Everything police had claimed in 1989 collapsed instantly. The most damning truth. Reyes didn't just confess. He explained how he did it. The location. The sequence. The timing. Every detail contradicted the prosecution's case. And matched reality. The 5 confessions? Impossible. They could not have happened. Panic inside the system. Prosecutors scrambled. Police went silent. Officials avoided the press. Because this wasn't just a wrongful conviction. It was an exposure. Of coercion. Of racism. Of manufactured guilt. The system hadn't made a mistake. It had built a lie. The review that couldn't be stopped. An independent review was ordered. Every confession was re-examined. Interrogation tapes were analyzed. Timelines reconstructed. The conclusion was unavoidable. The Central Park 5 were innocent. They always had been. Exoneration. Too late, but necessary. In 2002, the convictions were officially vacated. Not reduced. Not questioned. Vacated. Legally erased. The men were exonerated. 13 years too late. What exoneration doesn't give back? It doesn't restore childhood. It doesn't erase trauma. It doesn't return years spent in cages. It doesn't heal families permanently broken. Exoneration is not justice. It is acknowledgement. Corey Wise walks free. Corey Wise walked out of prison after nearly 12 years. He had entered as a teenager. He left as a man shaped by survival. The world applauded. But Corey didn't smile. Freedom felt unreal. Silence from those responsible. No police officer went to prison. No prosecutor was charged. No apology came easily. The same system that destroyed 5 lives protected itself. Again, the civil lawsuit. The men sued New York City. They didn't want revenge. They wanted recognition of harm. In 2014, the city settled for $41 million. Money could never measure the loss. But the settlement confirmed something important. They were wronged. Public memory is short. For years, Many still believe the original story, because lies told loudly live longer than truths spoken quietly. Even after exoneration, some refuse to accept it. Racism is stubborn that way. Donald Trump never apologized. Despite overwhelming evidence, Trump stood by his original stance. No apology, no acknowledgement, just silence. History took note. Prison, childhood ends. Prison does not announce itself as an ending. It pretends to be a pause. For Corey Wise, Kevin Richardson, Antron McCray, Yusef Salaam, and Raymond Santana, it arrived disguised as procedure, justice, and consequences. But the moment the steel doors closed behind them, childhood didn't pause. It died. They entered the system as boys, scared, confused, still clinging to the belief that adults were supposed to protect them. What greeted them instead was concrete, steel, and a cruelty so routine it barely needed words. Corey Wise was sent to an adult prison, not because he was dangerous, not because he was guilty, but because the system had no place for a poor black boy once it decided he was disposable. Within days, Corey learned the rules no one explains. Don't make eye contact. Don't look weak. Don't speak unless spoken to. And never, ever trust anyone. He was beaten for walking too slowly. Beaten for standing in the wrong place. Beaten because violence was the language of control, and he had no translator. Each blow rewrote his understanding of the world. Each night stripped away another layer of innocence. Kevin Richardson was younger, smaller, and the prison sensed it. Isolation became his reality. Solitary confinement swallowed his days whole, a silent box where time lost meaning and thoughts turned inward. The loneliness was louder than screams. Kevin tried to end his life not because he wanted to die, but because he wanted the pain to stop. The system labeled it self-harm. No one labeled it what it really was. A child begging to escape a nightmare adults created. Outside the prison walls, their families were breaking too. Mothers took on second jobs, third jobs, whatever it took to afford phone calls, legal fees, bus rides for visits that ended too soon. They learned how to smile in visiting rooms while their hearts collapsed silently. They fought alone. No headlines followed them home. No cameras recorded the quiet devastation. The world moved on. Birthdays passed without candles. Teenage years vanished behind bars. Dreams dissolved into survival. The system did not rehabilitate them. It erased them. And worst of all, it never doubted itself. Childhood didn't fade slowly. It ended the moment prison decided these boys were men. The truth emerges years later. Truth has a strange way of waiting. It doesn't rush. It doesn't beg to be believed. It simply waits for the lies to collapse under their own weight. For 13 years, the truth about the Central Park jogger case was buried beneath paperwork, prison walls, and a justice system that had already congratulated itself and moved on. The city had its villains. The headlines had their story. The prisons had their bodies. There was no incentive to reopen the wound, until one man decided to speak. His name was Matias Reyes. By 2002, Reyes was already serving a life sentence for multiple rapes and a murder. He was violent, methodical, and disturbingly consistent in his crimes. Unlike the teenagers imprisoned for the Central Park attack, Reyes left behind something the system could not ignore: DNA. While the 5 boys sat in cells replaying the same questions, why us? When will someone listen? Reyes carried a secret no one had ever asked him about. He had attacked the jogger. Alone. One man. One crime. One truth. Reyes knew details that had never been made public. He described the location, the movements, the sequence of violence, facts that aligned perfectly with the physical evidence that never fit the boys' confessions. And when investigators finally listened, the truth hit like a collision. The DNA matched. Not partially, not questionably, perfectly. Every scientific marker pointed to Reyes. The same science that had been ignored in 1989 now screamed what the boys had said all along. They didn't do it. The confessions? Fabricated under pressure. The timelines? Impossible. The stories? Contradictory. The truth didn't just emerge, it detonated. Prosecutors were forced to confront something unthinkable. The case they had built careers on was a lie. Detectives had coerced children. Media had fueled hysteria. The public had demanded punishment, not accuracy. And the system had complied. Quietly, internal reviews began. Old tapes were replayed. Hours of teenagers answering leading questions, exhausted, confused, desperate to go home. no lawyers present, no parents protecting them, just authority pressing until compliance broke resistance. The truth revealed something even darker than a wrongful conviction. It revealed intention. The boys weren't misjudged. They were selected. Their race made them convenient. Their poverty made them defenseless. Their youth made them controllable. And now, years later, the truth stood in a room full of officials who had hoped it would never surface. The confession of Matias Reyes did not just exonerate 5 men. It exposed a system that had chosen certainty over justice and never looked back. But truth doesn't ask permission. It demands acknowledgement. And once spoken, it cannot be buried again. Exoneration, too late. Freedom arrived quietly. No sirens. No celebration. No moment that could undo what had already been done. In 2002, the courts overturned every conviction tied to the Central Park case. The legal language was clean, efficient, almost sterile. Vacated. Dismissed. Exonerated. Words that sound powerful on paper, but feel painfully small when stacked against 13 years of stolen life. The men walked out of prison older than they should have been. Their faces carried time prison had carved into them. Lines earned too early. Eyes trained to scan for danger even in open air. They were free, but freedom felt unfamiliar. For Corey Wise, the gate's opening didn't erase the years he spent surviving in adult prison as a teenager. He had learned how to brace for violence, how to disappear emotionally, how to exist without expecting kindness. Outside those walls, the world moved faster than he remembered. Cell phones replaced payphones. Music had changed. Friends had aged without him. He wasn't re-entering society. He was entering it for the first time, as a man shaped by punishment instead of possibility. Kevin Richardson carried invisible scars that freedom could not heal. Years of isolation had rewired his mind. Crowds felt overwhelming. Silence felt threatening. Nightmares didn't stop just because the bars were gone. Exoneration didn't return mental health. It didn't restore trust. It didn't give back the version of himself that had never learned to fear authority. Antron McCrae missed his father's death while incarcerated. Raymond Santana lost relationships that couldn't survive time and distance. Yusef Salaam lost years of education, opportunity, and identity. Innocence did not refund what prison had stolen. The city of New York acknowledged the error in the only language it understood: money. After years of legal battles, the men were awarded $41 million, a number that sounded enormous to the public. But no settlement can purchase childhood. No check can refund trauma. No apology can replace time. There was no formal apology from the city. No press conference admitting racial bias. No accountability for the detectives who coerced confessions. No consequences for prosecutors who ignored evidence. The system corrected the record without correcting itself. And the men were expected to move on. To heal quietly. To be grateful. To not ask why it happened in the first place. Freedom came too late to undo the damage. It only made the absence more visible. They were innocent men walking into a world that had already decided who they were, and never bothered to correct the lie. The real lesson: systemic racism. This was never just a mistake. Mistakes are accidental. Mistakes are corrected quickly. Mistakes come with apologies. What happened to the 5 boys in Central Park was not an error in judgment. It was the predictable result of a system designed to value control over truth. From the very beginning, the outcome was decided by skin color. In 1989, New York City was tense, afraid, and desperate for someone to blame. Crime dominated headlines. Fear ruled public conversation. And when fear rises, it looks for faces it already distrusts. Black and brown faces. The boys didn't need evidence stacked against them. Their existence was enough. Police didn't ask, "What happened?" They asked, "Who can we make this stick to?" The answer was easy. Poor teenagers. No lawyers present. Parents shut out. Long hours of interrogation. Confessions were not discovered. They were manufactured. The system called it standard procedure. History calls it coercion. Their statements contradicted one another. The timeline didn't make sense. Physical evidence excluded them. None of it mattered. Because the system wasn't searching for accuracy. It was searching for closure. Speed mattered more than truth. Public reassurance mattered more than justice. Convictions mattered more than children. If the accused had been white, from affluent neighborhoods, the case would have unfolded differently. Lawyers would have been present. Parents would have been notified. Interrogations would have stopped at the first inconsistency. The benefit of doubt would have existed. Instead, the boys were labeled animals and predators by media outlets before a trial even began. That language didn't just influence public opinion, it licensed brutality. When a society dehumanizes children, it justifies destroying them. And the system protected itself at every stage. Detectives were praised. Prosecutors advanced their careers. Judges trusted the process. Even after DNA evidence emerged years later, resistance remained. Admitting wrongdoing would mean acknowledging bias, and institutions rarely confess to their own design flaws. Systemic racism doesn't announce itself with hatred. It hides behind procedure. It wears professionalism. It speaks in legal language. It ruins lives while insisting it is neutral. The Central Park case became a blueprint, not for justice, but for exposure. It showed how easily fear can override fairness, how quickly society trades children for comfort, how deeply race determines who is believed and who is disposable. This wasn't about 5 boys. It was about a system that decided who deserved protection and who could be sacrificed. Powerful close. They were called animals, predators, monsters, names chosen carefully, because once you stop calling someone human, hurting them feels justified. Newspapers printed their faces before facts. Television debates discussed their guilt as entertainment. Politicians used their suffering as proof that they were tough on crime. And the boys listened. From behind bars, from solitary cells, from visiting rooms where their mothers cried quietly so they wouldn't look weak. They learned early that truth did not protect them. Power did, but power was never on their side. Years later, when the truth finally surfaced, it did not roar. It whispered. It arrived in court documents, in DNA reports, in legal motions buried deep in archives. And still, it changed everything. This is Voices Unheard, where ignored stories finally speak. Bell subscribe, Blackheart share, loudspeaker speak up, because the next unheard voice could be anyone.